Welcome back, Room 13. We are reading By the Great Horn Spoon by Sid Fleischman. And today we are on Chapter 8. We know that in the last 7 chapters we have followed Praiseworthy the butler and Master Jack, the young boy, on their trip around Cape Horn, or so we thought around Cape Horn. Seems they took a little shortcut through the dangerous Strait of Magellan. But they are on their way from Boston to California to join the gold rush. And at the end of chapter 7, they finally arrived. So that's where we pick up to meet our characters. Chapter 8 is called Saved by a Whisker. And we have a character here who seems not unlike Captain Swain, but we can tell he has a different kind of hat. Seems a little grumpy, maybe a little, I don't know, dangerous maybe. We know a lot of the characters in Gold Rush towns were quite dangerous. They had guns, they had other things, and they were all fighting for the same gold, so it could be dangerous. But I'm thinking, I know whiskers aren't just like whiskers that cats and dogs have. Sometimes facial hair on men is also called whiskers. So maybe the whiskers are his mustache or his beard. So I am looking forward to seeing what happens in Chapter 8. In his pea jacket and stocking cap, Jack felt 14 years old, at least, maybe 15. He stood in the bow of the whaleboat and watched the long wharf come closer. They bumped against the boat stairs, and Jack was the first out. His heart raced with the excitement of the moment. They had arrived, and he was ready to start digging. "Not so fast, Master Jack," said Praiseworthy. "Don't forget your pick and shovel." "And don't start digging up the streets," laughed Mountain Jim. "Folks might not appreciate it." A hilltop telegraph had signaled the arrival of a side-wheeler, and now it seemed as if all of San Francisco had turned out. The wharf was alive with men, women, and children, not to mention dogs, mules, and chickens. Seagulls flocked in the air like confetti. Weighted down with their belongings, Praiseworthy and Jack started along the wharf. There were barrels and boxes piled everywhere. Peddlers and hawkers and hotel runners mixed through the crowd and shouted at the newcomers. "Welcome, boys! Welcome to the fastest growing city in the world! Flannel shirts for sale, red flannel shirts, gents. They don't show the dirt. Try the Ninatack Hotel, the cleanest beds in town. Horn spoons, you'll need 'em at the Diggins, carved from genuine ox horn. Stay at the Parker House, none better." The wharf seemed a mile long and the noisiest place on earth. Jack was dazzled by what he saw. Tattooed islanders and East India sailors and silent Chinese with pigtails dangling behind them like black chains. There were Mexicans moving about to the jingle of their heavy silver spurs, and Chileans in long serapes. There were mule skinners and businessmen, and there were miners in jackboots and red flannel shirts, with the mud of the Diggins still in their beards. The city rang to the sound of hammers. Buildings were going up everywhere, and a sand dredger was pounding the air. Men stood in the doorways of the shops, ringing handbells. "Auction! Auction going on! Fresh eggs just arrived from Panama. Step inside, gents. Chew-roots and chewing tobacco. Onions at auction. 50 bushels just come in from the Sandwich Islands. Also, calomel pills, castor oil, and carpet tacks." Jack gazed about at this street of wonders. There was a smell of mutton from the chop houses and a sizzle of hot grease from the oyster shops. Suddenly, Mountain Jim stopped short. "Billy be hanged," he said, lifting his nose in the air. "Smell that?" Praiseworthy nodded. "It's strong enough to knock a man down." "Makes your mouth water, don't it?" "Not exactly," said Jack, trying not to breathe. "It's bear meat, real California home cooking. Good luck in the Diggins, boys. I'm going to follow my nose." Following up the scent like a bloodhound, Mountain Jim crossed the street and turned into a restaurant. Before long, Mr. Azariah Jones dropped away, unable to resist the lure of the auction shops another moment. The lure of the auction shops another moment. Why would Mr. Azariah Jones want to go to the auction shops? What does he do again? You know what? I need to look back in my book. It's been a while since I remember what Mr. Azariah Jones does. I know Dr. Buckbee is the horse doctor. Oh, Mr. Azariah Jones had the potatoes that went bad that Praiseworthy helped him sell to the Frenchman. So he's a trader. He's a businessman. So I wonder if he wants to go into those auction houses to maybe buy some things that he'll resell. Maybe that's what's going on. Okay. Praiseworthy and Jack continued along the boardwalk, which was hammered together mostly out of barrel staves, and reached the United States Hotel. Captain Swain had recommended it. "A fine room, if you please," Praiseworthy said to the hotel clerk. "And I think a tub would be in order." "Very good, sir," replied the clerk. He was a bald-headed man with thin strands of hair combed sideways from ear to ear. "That'll be $10 extra each." "What's that?" Praiseworthy scowled. "We don't want to bathe in champagne." "Water will do, sir." "Champagne'd be almost cheaper, gents. Water's $1 a bucket. Unless you want to wait until next November. Prices come down when it rains." "We'll wait," said Praiseworthy with decision. In this part of the world, he thought, a man had to strike it rich just to keep his neck clean. He signed the register, and Jack gazed at the bearded miner pacing back and forth across the lobby floor. He wore a floppy hat, and chestnut hair tumbled out on all sides like mattress stuffing coming loose. He kept glancing at the loud wall clock as if every advancing second might be his last. Jack couldn't take his eyes off the man. Tucked in his wide leather belt were a revolver, a horn spoon, and a soft buckskin bag. Gold dust, Jack thought. He must have just got in from the mines. "Ruination," the miner began to mutter. "Ruination." Praiseworthy blotted the register. "How," he asked the clerk, "does one get to the mines?" "Riverboat leaves every afternoon at 4 o'clock from the Long Wharf. Fare to Sacramento City is $25. From there, you make your way to the diggings by stage, muleback, or foot." Jack shot a glance at Praiseworthy. $25 each? Why, they didn't have that much money. But the butler didn't so much as raise an eyebrow. "We'll be taking the boat tomorrow," he told the clerk. "Ruination," said the miner. "Come along, Master Jack," said Praiseworthy. The walls of their room were lined with blood-red calico, and there was china matting on the plank floor. The window looked out on the shipping in the bay, the masts as thick as a pine forest. They were not only gold ships, but Navy frigates and Chinese junks, and the going and coming of longboats. Wait, I mentioned something about a forest. I thought they just got off a boat. I'm going to read that again. The window looked out on the shipping in the bay. The masts, well, I know a mast is a part of a ship. The masts as thick as a pine forest. Oh, you know what? The author is using a simile here. Remember, a simile is a kind of figurative language that compares two things using the word like or as. So it says the masts as thick as a pine forest. So with all the boats that are out there, that center part, the mast that holds up the sails, they were thick and there were so many of them, it was as if they were in a forest, like the trunks of trees. So the author's trying to show me that there were so many boats there arriving and leaving, just to kind of give us a scale of how many people were there. So again, that's a simile used like or as, and authors often use these to help us imagine things and make comparisons. And so that's what the author is doing here. Back to the story. But Jack wasn't interested in the view. $50 just to get to Sacramento City? He said. We'll have to walk. Good exercise, no doubt, but we haven't time for it. Praiseworthy gazed out at the distant hills across the bay. Sacramento City was more than 100 miles upriver. He had heard, and the diggings in the foothills beyond that. Let me see. It took us 5 months to get this far, and it will take us another 5 months to get home. If we are to keep your Aunt Arabella from being sold out, we have 2 months left. 2 months to fill our pockets with nuggets. Jack found himself pacing back and forth, like the miner in the lobby below. Ruination, Jack said. We've come all this way, and now we're no closer. Nonsense, said Praiseworthy. There was a pitcher half filled with water on the chest, and he poured a small amount into the washpan. We'll be on tomorrow's riverboat, I promise you. Now then, I suggest we wash up as best we can, Master Jack. Wash, Jack thought. There wasn't time to wash. How will we pay the fare? Let me see. We have $38 left. That's a start, isn't it? Of course, we'll have our room and meals to pay. But if I detect one thing in the air, it's opportunity. The sooner you wash, Master Jack, the sooner we can tend to our financial dilemma. Your Aunt Arabella wouldn't allow you abroad on the streets with dirty ears and sea salt in your eyebrows. And don't forget the soap. Ruination, Jack muttered again. He might as well be home in Boston. They washed and changed into fresh clothes, and Praiseworthy gathered up their white linen shirts. They needed a good starching and ironing. Praiseworthy had noticed a laundry sign a few doors down from the hotel. It wouldn't do, he told himself, to see Master Jack turn into a ragamuffin. No, indeed, Miss Arabella would never forgive me. When they returned to the lobby, the shaggy miner was still there, pacing and muttering in his dusty beard. He glanced at Jack, a dark, sudden glance. And then the butler and the boy went out on the street. But as they ambled along the boardwalk, Jack began to realize that the miner was following them. Or so it seemed for a moment. Praiseworthy turned into the laundry, a mere wooden framework tacked with canvas, and set the bundle of shirts on the counter. How soon may we have these back, sir? Asked the butler. Very fast service, answered the laundryman. His pigtail bobbed as he bowed. How fast? 3 months, unless there's a typhoon. 3 months? Typhoon? The man was mad, Praiseworthy thought, or perhaps it was the entire city. We fully intend to leave by the 4 o'clock riverboat tomorrow. Not possible, said the Chinese man, bowing and slipping his hands into his flowing sleeves. We send laundry to China. It come back 3-4 months. All wash, starch, iron. Unless there's typhoon, take longer. No one do laundry here. Everything sky high. Cheaper send to China. Praiseworthy picked up the bundle of shirts and gave Jack a look of modest defeat. Since we've managed without baths, I dare say we can do without starched shirts. Come along. They had hardly gone half a block when Jack saw the miner in the floppy hat once again behind them. The black pistol in his belt suddenly looked larger. But Jack said nothing. The miner could want nothing with them. Nothing at all. He was still at their heels when the butler and the boy crossed the street. Now Jack was beginning to feel anxious, even a little scared. Finally, he looked up at Praiseworthy. He's following us. Who's following us? Asked the butler. That miner from the hotel. Stuff and nonsense. The streets are free to everyone. But he's following us, Praiseworthy. Nothing to fear in broad daylight, Master Jack. They continued along the sandy plaza, still looking for opportunity, and the miner marched right behind them. Must be another madman, said Praiseworthy, turning. He stopped, and the miner stopped, and they stood face to face. Sir, said the butler, are you following us? Ruination, I sure am. I'll thank you to go your way, sir. No offense, gents, the miner said. Been on the verge of breaking in on your conversation, but it didn't seem courteous. It was hard to see his mouth for the fullness of his beard. They call me Quartz Jackson, and I just come in from the diggings. My fiancé's due in on the stage at any minute, coming up from the capital at Monterey. We ain't never met, but we writ a lot of letters, and that's just it. And that's just what? Said Praiseworthy. We're supposed to be getting married, but Ruination, when she takes one look at me, she's going to think I'm part grizzly bear. He whipped off his floppy hat and his dusty hair fell out on all sides. She'll get right back on the stage for Monterey. But shucks, I ain't such a bad-looking gent. Leastways, I wasn't when I went to the diggings. I'm just a mite growed over, you might say. Well, I've been tramping every street in town looking for a barber, but they all lit out for the mines. Didn't seem to be anyone left here but the Cheap Johns. Cheap Johns? Said Praiseworthy. Auctioneers. Anyway, that's why I couldn't help staring at the lad here. Me? Said Jack. Why, that yeller hair of yours looks fresh from the barber shop, all cut and trimmed. I figured you must have flushed out a barber and maybe you'd do Quartz Jackson the favor of leading me to him. If Jack had feared the miner for a moment, he couldn't help smiling at him now. He liked the man. No, sir, he said. I haven't been to a barber, unless you mean Praiseworthy. Praiseworthy? At your service, said the butler. It's true, I've been cutting Master Jack's hair, but only out of necessity. The miner's face, what could be seen of it, broke into a sunny smile. I'd be much obliged if you'd barber me up, Mr. Praiseworthy. Name your price. But I'm not a barber, sir. I'm a butler. A what? I couldn't accept any money for merely... Well, now that's mighty white of you. Tell you what I'll do. I'll let you have all the hair you cut off. Praiseworthy and Jack exchanged fresh glances. The man was some sort of lunatic, after all. What earthly use did they have for the man's shorn locks? But it seemed wise to humor him, and Praiseworthy said, I'll be glad to help you in your hour of need, sir. Consider it a modest wedding present. 20 minutes later, the miner was seated on a nail keg in a corner of the hotel porch, and Praiseworthy was snipping away with the shears. Quartz Jackson insisted that every lock be caught as it fell. Jack was kept busy holding a washpan under Praiseworthy's busy scissors. It worried him that time was wasting and they were yet to make their boat fare, but he knew it would have been impossible for Praiseworthy to turn his back on a gentleman in distress, even a peculiar miner like Mr. Quartz Jackson. That seems to be something I've noticed too about Praiseworthy. Just always offering to help people. You know, he went with Master Jack on this crazy adventure, right? So that he could help Aunt Arabella and the family raise money. I definitely see what Jack's talking about here. Might the town growed, though, said the miner. Must be all of 4,000-5,000 folks in the place. You gents figure on going to the digs? We do indeed, said Praiseworthy. I come from Hangtown. The boys have been locating a good lot of color up that way. Color? The yeller stuff. Gold. If you get up Hangtown way, tell him you're a friend of Quartz Jackson. Tell him I'll be coming home with my bride in a couple of weeks. Sure is nice of you to shear me this way. Would you mind trimming the beard while you're at it? Always itching and I can hardly find my mouth to spit with. Jack, young Jack, a bit of sideburn is getting away in the breeze. Wouldn't want you to lose any. Yes, sir, said Jack, catching the lock of hair. Quartz Jackson's face began to appear, snip by snip, like a statue being chipped out of stone. When Praiseworthy had finished, the miner turned to look at himself in the hotel window pane, and he almost jumped out of his jack boots. By the great horn spoon, he said, is that me? Quartz Jackson was obviously pleased. Why, I'd forgot I was so young. Quartz Jackson was a fine-looking gent at that, Jack thought. He had good teeth and an easy smile. Except for his revolver, his horn spoon, and his red flannel shirt, he hardly seemed the same man. But what did he expect them to do with the hair cuttings? Stuff a mattress? Your fiancé will be very pleased, smiled Praiseworthy. Our congratulations on your forthcoming marriage, sir. Much obliged, Praiseworthy. You saved me from certain ruination. The least I can do is learn you how to work a gold pan. Water boy, you there, fetch us a bucket of dew over here. The miner paid for the water by taking a pinch of fine gold dust from his buckskin pouch. Jack was eager to get the hang of mining, and Quartz Jackson, peculiar or not, was clearly an expert. Give me that washpan, Jack, young Jack. Jack handed over the tin pan, piled high with chestnut whiskers and trimmings. The miner wet them down with fresh water and began to swish the pan around. Gold's heavy, he explained. Nothing heavier. Even the yellow dust sinks to the bottom if you keep working the pan like this. Then he handed the washpan to Jack and taught him the motion. The water turned brown from the dirt and mud that had gathered in Quartz Jackson's whiskers and hair. Finally, he poured off everything but a thin residue at the bottom of the pan. Jack's eyes opened like blossoms. Gold dust. Why, look you there, the miner roared with laughter. The boy's panned himself some color. I figured I scratched enough pay dirt into my beard to assay out about $14 an ounce. Since I give you the whiskers and all, the gold is yours. Jack had never known a more exciting moment in his life. The grains of dust sparkled like yellow fire, and there was even a flake or two. Half an hour later, while Quartz Jackson was having a $10 tub bath, Praiseworthy and Jack were plucking opportunity from the air. They put up a sign that said, "Free haircuts, miners only." That's the end of chapter 9. We're going to do chapter 8. We're going to do chapter 9 right now. The Man in the Jippa Jappa Hat. Now, I don't want to say much about this picture that accompanies our chapter title, but if you look closely, you might notice what I notice. Remember, these chapter titles and these little drawings that the author has for us are clues. We're supposed to use them to help make predictions about what's going to happen and to help us understand what's going on. So, take one last look at that picture. It was about a week before Praiseworthy and Jack reached the diggings. They had caught the 4 o'clock riverboat at the end of the long wharf. Dr. Buckbee came to see them off, but he was staying behind in San Francisco. "I'm going to wait for Cut-Eye Higgins," he said. "He's bound to turn up with my map. I'll meet every ship that comes in until I get my hands on the scoundrel." That night, in their stateroom, Jack polished his horn spoon. Praiseworthy had let him buy it on the wharf with a pinch of gold dust. Finally, Jack tucked it inside his belt and looked at himself in the mirror. All he lacked was a red flannel shirt and a floppy hat. A beard was out of the question, at least for the time being. He glanced at Praiseworthy. He wondered what his partner would look like with his whiskers grown out and a revolver in his belt. Praiseworthy was as tall as Quartz Jackson and as straight as an awning post. There were even sun creases forming in the corners of his eyes. Yes, sir, Jack thought. Praiseworthy would make a fine-looking gent. Their adventure in barbering had paid expenses nicely. There was gold dust left over, and Praiseworthy had poured it into the little finger on his left white glove for safekeeping. He had made a list of the gold camps the miners had bandied about, and now he studied the names. Chili Gulch, Grizzly Flats, Timbuktu, he muttered. They sound like dreadful places to take a growing boy. They sounded glorious to Jack. Don't worry about me, Praiseworthy. I'm thinking of your Aunt Arabella. What should she think if you write from a place like Bedbug, or Whiskey Flat, or Hangtown? Angel's Camp, she might approve of that. But they say it's a fearful place. Let me see. There's Rough and Ready, there's You Bet, and there's Humbug. Not to mention Rawhide, Roaring Camp, and Cutthroat. Well, what'll it be, Master Jack? One place sounds as bloodthirsty as the next. Hangtown, said Jack. Then Hangtown it is, said Praiseworthy. The following morning, Jack saw Indians for the first time in his life. They came to the banks of the river to watch the crowded boat and listen to the ringing of its pilot house bell. Jack stared back in fascination. Wouldn't his sisters, Constance and Sarah, be frightened? But that night, when the flat-bottomed riverboat got stuck on a sandbar, Jack felt a little uneasy himself. What if the savages came aboard when the passengers were asleep and helped themselves to a few scalps? Well, I want to explain that part to you a little. I know we've talked in our class about how we call what used to be called Indians and what some people call Native Americans. We call them indigenous peoples in room 13, and we do that because they were indigenous to this land before we arrived on it. Indigenous meaning they were here first. This was their land. But this is written in the perspective of this time, meaning that the characters we're following and the authors that the way the narrator, the person who is telling the story, is speaking is from a long time ago when they did call them Indians. And so that's why I read it the way it is here. But you may not know that people back in the day thought that indigenous people were savages, as they said here, that they were people who were not skilled, that they didn't have morals, and that they were very violent. And so that's the stereotype that we know to be untrue now, that is being said here. And it's important that we talk about these stereotypes because, like I said, this is written from a different time. And so it's important that it was in here because this is how people thought and what people believed about indigenous peoples back in the time of when this was all going on. So it's important that we look at the difference between how people saw indigenous people then and how we see them now. So I just want to make sure I pointed that out to you. Stuff and nonsense, Praiseworthy smiled, shaving himself at the cabin mirror. The steward tells me they're digger Indians, quite tame. They dig for roots and acorns and are a menace to nothing but wasps and grasshoppers, which they consider a delicacy. With one sandbar and another, it was 2 days before Sacramento City came into view. A shore cannon went off, raising a cloud of dust to announce the arrival of the boat. Townspeople flocked to the river. Praiseworthy and Jack carried their picks and shovels, gold pans and carpet bags through the crowd. It was the end of June, and the valley shimmered with heat. Wooden awnings stretched over the storefronts like eye shades. As they walked along, Jack kept gazing at the mountains, the great Sierra Nevadas. If you were on the Mountain Regions team, or if you remember from the Mountain Regions team's presentation when we did our California 4 regions, you will know that the Sierra Nevadas are a large mountain range in California, and that is mainly what we consider the mountain region of California. And we know from our readings about the gold rush that gold was often found in rivers, and these rivers snaked through mountains and hills, and so it makes sense that Jack is in this setting, right? So that helps us know what to imagine, what to look for. They stood dark, blue and purple against the hot morning sky. That must be where the gold was, Jack thought, and fresh hope shot through him. They were almost there, weren't they? A stage was leaving for the mines at 2 o'clock. To raise their fare, the butler and the boy had no choice but to sell off a pick and a shovel. Mining tools were in great demand, and prices were astonishing. The pick and shovel brought $100 each. I know we know from our debate that $100 was a lot of money back then. So they have $200, right? Because $100 for the pick, $100 for the shovel. That's a fair amount of money back in the day. Do they even need to go hunting for gold? My goodness. After paying their stage fare, Praiseworthy poured the gold dust left over into the tips of all 5 fingers on his left glove. He had difficulty getting his hand in, but he made it. His left hand felt as heavy as an anvil. The dust was their grub stake, and he had no intention of losing it to some rascal along the way. We ought to carry a gun, Praiseworthy, a 4-shooter. There's no time for that now, Master Jack. They were the last passengers to board the stagecoach. They had hardly taken their seats when the driver, a bandy-legged man in old buckskins, snapped his whip. The horses bolted, and they were off to the diggings. Jack was squeezed in beside Praiseworthy and a red-faced man wearing a string tie. He was quick to introduce himself as an undertaker. Fletcher's the name, gentlemen. Jonas T. Fletcher of Hangtown. I don't mind telling you that business is brisk in my line of work up there in the diggings. Glad to meet you. Yes, sir. Socially or professionally, as the case may be. In the seat opposite sat 2 Frenchmen in brand new jackboots and checked shirts with the creases still in them. Between them, and opposite Jack, so that their knees almost touched, sat a man in a dusty linen suit and his hat pulled down over his face. He had been sleeping that way from the moment Praiseworthy and Jack had entered the coach. Don't see how a man can sleep on this road, Jonas T. Fletcher laughed. Maybe he's dead. Ain't that a fine-looking jippa-jappa hat he's got? Must have bought that in Panama. I come across the plains myself, clear from Missouri. Okay, so this man has a hat hanging over his head, hiding his face. He's wearing a jippa-jappa hat, and that was part of the title of this chapter, right? The man in the jippa-jappa hat. Must have come through from Panama. I wonder if you're picking up all these clues from the author. Jonas T. Fletcher droned on. The team of horses raised red clouds of dust, and Jack watched the passing sights as best he could. They overtook ox-drawn wagons loaded with stores from the mines and strings of pack mules. The man in the fine straw jippa-jappa hat slept on. A large ruby ring glistened from his finger. With the jostling of the stagecoach, his coat fell open, and Jack could see the butt of a dueling pistol tucked inside his belt. It was almost an hour before he awoke. His hand rested on the pistol, and he tipped the hat back off of his face. He looked straight into Jack's eyes with the faintest of smiles, as if he hadn't been asleep at all. Jack very nearly jumped. It was Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins. That's right. In our picture, the man in the hat had a cut eye. And remember how Dr. Buckbee said he was going to wait for Cut-Eye Higgins? Cut-Eye must be coming to look for gold himself. Lots of breadcrumbs left there, lots of foreshadowing. Remember, foreshadowing is what an author does when they leave little hints of things to come in the future. So lots of foreshadowing about this from Sid Fleischman. I hope you enjoyed it. I am looking forward to seeing what happens between Praiseworthy Master Jack and Cut-Eye Higgins in the next chapter when I see you next. Have a great day, Room 13.